Eli Carter was one of the poorest humans on Outpost K-17, a cold metal station that floated in deep space near the edge of the galaxy. Most travelers who passed through the station never noticed him. They only saw the busy market halls, the bright alien shops, and the loud cargo docks. But Eli spent his long days in the dark maintenance tunnels under the station, fixing broken machines that nobody else wanted to repair. His job was simple and tiring. Cargo loaders, old air pumps, broken door panels, damaged power lines. If something stopped working, the station manager called Eli. The pay was small, just enough for a cheap room and one simple meal each day. That night was colder than usual, even inside the giant metal station. The market lights were dim and the crowd was smaller than normal. Many ships had already left the station before the night cycle began. Eli finally finished repairing the damaged cargo lift near Dock 7. His hands were covered in grease and small cuts from sharp metal parts. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he had not eaten since morning. He checked the few credits left in his pocket, just enough for one cheap meal, nothing more. At the end of the market hall, a small food stall was still open. The tired alien vendor barely looked up as Eli walked closer. "One nutrient meal," Eli said quietly, placing his last credits on the counter. The vendor slid a small metal tray toward him. On it was a simple meal, a warm protein loaf and a cup of thick nutrient soup. It was not fancy food, but to Eli it smelled wonderful. He took the tray and walked to a quiet corner of the market where old cargo crates were stacked against the wall. It was the only place where the loud station noise felt a little distant. Eli sat down on an empty crate and picked up the spoon. But before he could take the first bite, he heard a small sound behind the crates. A soft scraping noise, like something moving slowly. Eli frowned and leaned forward, looking into the dark space between the containers. At first he saw nothing, only shadows and cold metal walls. Then two small glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. Eli blinked in surprise. Slowly, a small figure stepped out from behind the crate. It was a child, but not human. The little alien was thin and weak, its pale blue skin almost gray from hunger. Large dark eyes stared at the food in Eli's hands. The child's small hands trembled slightly. For a moment neither of them moved. People passed by in the market, but no one looked toward the corner. Most aliens avoided getting involved in problems on the station. Eli noticed something strange. The child's clothes were torn and dirty, but the material looked expensive, like royal fabric from a wealthy world. The child looked exhausted, as if it had been running for a long time. Eli slowly lowered his spoon. "You hungry?" he asked softly. The alien child did not answer with words. It only nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the food. Eli looked down at his meal, the only food he could afford today. His stomach growled again. Louder this time. For a second he hesitated. Then he sighed quietly. "Well," he muttered to himself, "guess someone needs it more than me." He gently pushed the tray across the crate toward the child. The alien hesitated, as if unsure it was allowed to take it. "It's okay," Eli said with a small smile. "Go ahead." The child grabbed the food and began eating quickly, almost desperately. The small hands shook as it lifted the spoon again and again. Eli watched silently. Leaning back against the cold metal wall, he felt hungry, but seeing the child eat made him feel strangely better. Around them the market continued as usual. Voices talking, machines humming, traders arguing over prices. But suddenly something changed. A loud alarm siren exploded through the entire station. Red emergency lights flashed across the walls. The peaceful noise of the market instantly turned into panic. People shouted and ran toward the exits. Station security drones flew overhead, scanning the crowds. Outside the giant viewing windows, massive shadows appeared in space. Eli turned his head toward the glass and felt his heart skip. Dozens of enormous warships had appeared in orbit around the station, their weapons glowing with power. A deep voice echoed through the station speakers. "Emergency order. All civilians remain where they are. Imperial search teams are entering the station." Armored soldiers began rushing through the market entrances, their weapons ready. They are searching for the missing royal child. One officer shouted. Eli slowly looked back at the small alien sitting beside him. The child had stopped eating. Its eyes were wide with fear. Very slowly, the child looked up at Eli and whispered in a shaking voice, "Please, don't let them find me." The red emergency lights continued flashing across the metal walls of Outpost K-17. Loud sirens echoed through every hallway and market corridor, making the entire station feel tense and dangerous. People rushed in every direction, trying to reach their ships before the station locked down completely. Armored soldiers in dark uniforms poured through the entrances of the market hall, their boots hitting the metal floor with heavy sounds. Each soldier carried advanced weapons and scanning devices, searching every corner carefully. Eli Carter stood frozen beside the stack of cargo crates. His heart was beating fast as he looked down at the small alien child sitting beside him. Just seconds ago, the child had been eating his meal with desperate hunger. Now the spoon had fallen from the child's small hand. Fear filled the child's large dark eyes. Outside the giant viewing windows, the massive warships hovered around the station like silent hunters. Their engines glowed with blue energy, ready for battle. A loud voice echoed again through the station speakers. "Attention all civilians, remain calm and stay where you are. Imperial search teams will scan every section of the station." Eli swallowed slowly. He had lived on this station for years, and he had never seen this level of military presence before. Something serious was happening, very serious. The alien child beside him looked up again, its small voice shaking. "Please, don't let them find me," the child whispered. Eli frowned in confusion. "Why are they looking for you?" he asked quietly. The child looked toward the approaching soldiers and quickly shook its head. "There is no time," the child said softly. Footsteps echoed closer through the market hall. A group of soldiers entered the row of shops, scanning faces and checking behind cargo containers. One of them shouted loudly, "Search every corner. The prince cannot leave this station." Eli's eyes widened. "Prince?" He slowly looked back at the small alien child sitting beside him. The child lowered its head, as if that single word had revealed too much. For a moment, Eli's mind raced with questions. How could this weak, hungry child be a prince? And if it was true, why was he hiding alone on a forgotten space station? Another group of soldiers entered the market from the opposite side. Now the entire hall was filling with armed search teams. People stood against the walls as scanners passed over them. Some traders looked angry, others looked nervous, but no one dared argue with the soldiers. The empire that owned those warships was one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Eli slowly leaned closer to the child, lowering his voice. "If you're really the one they're looking for, you're in big trouble," he whispered. The child looked up again, fear clearly visible on its face. "They are not here to help me," the child said quietly. "They want to take me back." "That sounds like helping," Eli replied, confused. The child shook its head quickly. "They serve the generals." "Not my mother," Eli blinked. "Your mother?" he asked. The child hesitated for a moment. Then it spoke a sentence that made Eli's heart stop. "My mother is the Empress." For a few seconds Eli simply stared at the child, unsure if he had heard correctly. An Empress? That meant the child sitting beside him was not just important. He was royalty, one of the most valuable lives in the entire galaxy. And somehow that royal child was hiding in the dark corner of a station market, eating a poor mechanic's cheap dinner. Before Eli could ask another question, a loud crash echoed from the entrance of the market hall. More soldiers had arrived. These ones looked different, their armor darker, their weapons heavier. The officer leading them spoke sharply. "Seal the exits. Nobody leaves until we find the target." Metal doors slammed shut across the station entrances. The market was now completely locked down. Eli felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. If the soldiers found the child beside him, they would ask questions. And if they believed he helped hide the prince, his life on this station would be over, maybe much worse. The small alien child gently grabbed the edge of Eli's sleeve. The movement was small, but desperate. "Please," the child whispered again. "I don't want to go with them." Eli looked at the frightened face of the child. Then he looked at the soldiers slowly moving closer through the rows of crates. His mind told him the smart choice was simple. Step away. Let the soldiers find the child. Walk away and pretend he knew nothing. But something inside him refused to move. Maybe it was the fear in the child's eyes. Maybe it was the memory of how hungry the child had been just minutes ago. Or maybe Eli Carter was simply the kind of human who could not ignore someone who needed help. The soldiers were now only a few rows away. Scanning devices swept slowly across the cargo crates. If the scanners reached this corner, the child would be discovered instantly. Eli suddenly stood up. "Come with me," he whispered quickly. The child looked surprised. But Eli had already moved one of the cargo crates aside, revealing a small maintenance hatch hidden behind it. Few people on the station knew about the old tunnels beneath the market, but Eli had repaired half the station's machines. He knew every hidden path and forgotten corridor. The child quickly slipped through the hatch as Eli followed behind. He pulled the metal cover closed just as a scanning beam passed over the crates above. Darkness filled the narrow maintenance tunnel. For a moment everything was silent except for distant footsteps above them. Then the child looked at Eli again and spoke softly. "You helped me." Eli shrugged quietly in the darkness. "Yeah," he muttered. "Let's just hope that wasn't the worst decision of my life." Above them, heavy boots suddenly stopped right over the hatch, and a soldier's voice said, "Scanners detected something below the floor." The dark maintenance tunnel beneath the market was cold and silent. Dust covered the metal floor, and old cables hung loosely along the walls. Eli Carter stood completely still beside the small alien child. Barely breathing, above them, the heavy boots of Imperial soldiers echoed across the floor of the market. A scanning device hummed loudly, sending waves of blue light through the metal panels. "Scanners detected something below the floor," a soldier's voice said sharply. Eli's heart began pounding in his chest. He slowly looked at the child beside him. The alien prince looked just as terrified. For a few long seconds, neither of them moved. Then another soldier spoke above them. "It could just be old wiring or station equipment," the second voice said. "Check the next section," the first soldier replied after a moment. Their footsteps slowly moved away. The humming scanner sound faded into the distance. Only when the noise was completely gone did Eli finally release the breath he had been holding. "That was close," he whispered quietly. The alien child nodded silently, still shaking a little. The tunnel around them was dark, but small emergency lights glowed faintly along the ceiling. Eli turned and began walking deeper into the maintenance passage. "Come on," he said softly. "If we stay under the market, they will eventually find us." The child followed closely behind him, small footsteps echoing softly in the narrow corridor. After a few minutes of walking, Eli reached a junction where several tunnels split in different directions. He stopped and leaned against the wall for a moment, thinking, "You said those soldiers served the generals." "Not your mother," Eli said. "Yes," the child replied quietly. "Then you should probably start explaining why half the Empire's fleet is searching for you," Eli said. The child hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to trust him. Finally the small alien spoke. "My name is Kyle," the child said softly. "I am the first son of the Empress." Eli folded his arms, still trying to understand the situation. "Okay. Prince Kale," he said slowly. "So why are your own soldiers hunting you like criminals?" Kale looked down at the metal floor. "Because some of them want the throne," he answered. Eli raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a big problem." "It is," Kale said quietly. The young prince continued speaking in a soft voice. "Several powerful generals believe the Empire should be ruled by strength, not by peace. My mother ended many wars and made alliances with other worlds, but some leaders hate those decisions. They believe the Empire should conquer everything." Eli nodded slowly. "And you are in their way," he guessed. Kale looked up and gave a small nod. "If I disappear, the generals can control the throne more easily." Eli rubbed his face with one greasy hand. "So let me understand this," he said. "You escaped from a royal palace, ran across half the galaxy, and ended up hiding on a forgotten cargo station." Kale nodded again. I had help from loyal guards, he said, but many of them were captured while helping me escape. They told me to hide here until my mother's loyal fleet could reach me. Eli glanced toward the ceiling where distant footsteps still echoed faintly above. Judging by the warships outside, Eli said, I think the wrong fleet arrived first. Cale looked nervous again. Yes, he whispered. They found the station before my mother's forces. For a moment the tunnel became silent again. Eli stared down the corridor, thinking about the impossible situation he was now part of. He was just a poor mechanic who fixed broken cargo lifts. Now he was hiding the most important child in the Empire from a fleet of warships. Great, Eli muttered quietly. What? Cale asked. Nothing, Eli replied. Just realizing my life got very complicated in the last 10 minutes. Suddenly a loud metallic crash echoed somewhere behind them in the tunnel system. Both of them turned instantly. Voices could now be heard in the distance. They entered the maintenance tunnels, a soldier shouted. Spread out and search every corridor. Eli cursed under his breath. They found the hatch, he said quickly. Cale's eyes widened with fear again. What do we do? The prince asked. Eli quickly studied the tunnel map, painted faintly on the nearby wall. He pointed down the narrow passage to the left. That path leads to the old cargo reactor rooms, he said. Most of those areas are abandoned, which means... Cale asked, which means we might hide there, Eli answered. And if we are unlucky? Ayla gave a small, tired smile. Then we keep running. The voices behind them were getting louder now. Flashlights began sweeping across the tunnels in the distance. Eli grabbed a small metal tool from his belt and quickly opened a locked maintenance door ahead of them. The door slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside, Eli whispered. Cale slipped through the doorway as Eli followed behind him. He closed the door carefully and locked it again from the inside. The new corridor was darker and older than the previous one. Dust covered the floor, and broken machines were scattered along the walls. For a moment everything was quiet again. Then Cale suddenly stopped walking. Eli turned back toward him. What is it? He asked. The young prince was staring down the corridor ahead, his eyes wide with sudden fear. Eli slowly followed his gaze. At the far end of the hallway, several tall armored figures were already standing there, their weapons raised and glowing. One of the soldiers stepped forward and spoke coldly. Target located. Do not move. The narrow corridor felt even smaller when the soldiers stepped forward. Their dark armor reflected the weak emergency lights hanging from the ceiling. Weapons pointed directly at Eli Carter and the young alien prince. For a moment, the entire hallway became silent and tense. Dust floated slowly in the cold air. Eli raised his hands slightly, trying to look calm even though his mind was racing. The lead soldier moved closer, his helmet visor glowing faintly red as it scanned them. Target confirmed, the soldier said in a cold mechanical voice. The royal child has been located. Prince Cale slowly stepped back until his small shoulder touched the wall behind him. Fear filled his eyes again. Eli quickly glanced around the corridor, searching for anything that could help them escape. Broken machines, old pipes, sealed doors, nothing useful. The soldier aimed his weapon more carefully at Cale. Prince Cale, you will come with us, he ordered. You are under Imperial authority. Cale shook his head slowly. You do not serve the Empress, he said quietly. You serve the generals. The soldiers did not react to the accusation. Your cooperation is not required, the lead soldier replied. Two more soldiers stepped forward, preparing to grab the young prince. Ayla suddenly moved between them and Cale. The action surprised everyone in the corridor. The soldiers paused for a second. You should step aside, human, the lead soldier warned. This situation does not concern you. Eli forced a small, tired smile. Yeah, about that, he said slowly. I think it concerns me now. The soldiers raised their weapons higher. You are interfering with Imperial operations, the officer said. That is a serious crime. Eli shrugged slightly. I fix broken machines for a living, he replied. I'm already used to serious problems. The soldiers took another step forward. The situation was seconds away from turning violent. Eli knew he could not fight trained soldiers. But he noticed something else in the corridor. Along the wall behind the soldiers were several old power control panels, connected to the abandoned reactor systems. Eli's mechanic mind immediately understood what that meant. Unstable power lines, old emergency systems, dangerous if activated suddenly. He slowly moved one hand toward the small tool device attached to his belt. The lead soldier noticed the movement instantly. "Stop moving," the soldier ordered sharply. Eli pretended to freeze. "Relax," he said calmly. "Just adjusting my belt." But his fingers were already pressing the small control button on the device. The tool sent a short signal pulse into the nearby power panel. For half a second nothing happened. Then the corridor exploded with sparks. The old power system overloaded instantly. Bright flashes of electricity burst from the wall panels. The lights above them shattered and the entire hallway dropped into darkness. Alarms began screaming through the abandoned reactor section. "Power surge detected," a robotic station voice announced. The soldiers reacted quickly, activating helmet lights. But in that moment of confusion, Eli grabbed Cale's arm. "Run," he whispered urgently. They sprinted down a side passage just as sparks continued raining from the damaged panels. Behind them, the soldiers shouted orders. "Stop them," one yelled. Boots pounded against the metal floor as the soldiers began chasing them again. Eli and Cale raced through the twisting maintenance corridors. The tunnels were narrow and filled with old pipes and broken equipment. But Eli had spent years repairing machines across the station. He knew many of the forgotten paths, better than the station security teams. "Where are we going?" Cale asked while running beside him. Eli turned a sharp corner into another hallway. "The cargo hangars." He answered quickly. "If we reach Dock 9, we might find a ship." The prince looked surprised. "You can fly ships?" he asked. Eli shook his head while running. "Not well," he admitted, "but I can start one." Behind them, the soldiers were still chasing, their flashlights cutting through the darkness of the tunnels. Blaster shots suddenly fired down the corridor. Bright energy bolts slammed into the metal walls around them. Cale ducked as one blast hit a pipe above his head, sending hot steam into the air. "Faster!" Eli shouted. They finally reached a large metal door marked with faded warning symbols. Ayla quickly opened the control panel beside it and pulled several wires loose. The door slowly slid open with a loud grinding sound. Beyond it was a large cargo loading room filled with parked transport vehicles and shipping containers. Dim blue lights glowed across the hangar floor. For a moment, Eli thought they might actually escape. Then he heard a deep mechanical sound behind them. The soldiers had reached the door. Their armored figures stepped into the hangar, weapons raised again. "There is nowhere left to run," the lead soldier said coldly. Eli looked around desperately for another way out, but the hangar doors leading to space were sealed shut. Heavy footsteps approached slowly across the metal floor. Cale stood beside Eli, breathing hard. Just as the soldiers prepared to fire, the entire station suddenly shook violently. A massive explosion echoed somewhere outside. The soldiers stopped moving instantly. A new voice suddenly came through the station speakers, loud and powerful. "Attention all hostile forces," the voice announced. "You are ordered to stand down immediately." Outside the hangar windows, enormous new warships were arriving in orbit around the station, ships far larger and more powerful than the rebel fleet. Cale looked up at the window with wide eyes. Then a small, hopeful smile appeared on his face. "They came," he whispered. "My mother's fleet is here." The entire cargo hangar shook again as another explosion echoed through space outside the station. Loose metal chains hanging from the ceiling rattled loudly, and dust fell from the old cargo containers. Eli Carter quickly turned toward the large viewing window at the far side of the hangar. What he saw made his eyes widen in disbelief. Dozens of enormous warships had appeared around Outpost K-17. But these ships looked different from the rebel fleet that had surrounded the station earlier. Their hulls were brighter, covered with glowing silver markings and royal symbols. Long lines of blue engines burned behind them like small stars. The prince standing beside Eli looked up at the window with sudden hope in his eyes. "They came," Cale whispered again softly. "My mother's fleet." Before Eli could say anything, The rebel soldiers inside the hangar suddenly began receiving urgent messages through their helmets. Their leader stepped back slightly, clearly confused. "Report," he demanded into his communicator. But the response coming through the speaker sounded panicked. "Multiple royal battle groups have entered the system," a voice shouted through static. "Our outer ships are under heavy attack." Ely watched as the rebel officers slowly turned toward the viewing window. Outside, bright flashes of light began appearing across the dark space around the station. The royal fleet had already started fighting the rebel ships. Energy beams crossed the darkness like lightning. One rebel warship exploded in a huge fireball far away in orbit. Inside the hangar, the rebel soldiers suddenly looked far less confident. Their leader quickly raised his weapon again and pointed it toward Kale. "Grab the prince," he ordered his team. "If we escape with him, we can still control the Empire." Two soldiers rushed forward, their boots hitting the metal floor hard. Eli stepped in front of Kale again without thinking. "Seriously?" Eli muttered under his breath. "Why does everyone keep pointing guns at us tonight?" The soldiers ignored him and kept moving closer. Just as they were about to reach the prince, the massive cargo doors at the far side of the hangar suddenly exploded inward with a thunderous crash. Metal fragments flew across the floor as a powerful blast tore the doors apart. Bright white light flooded into the hangar from outside. Several armored figures rushed through the smoke, moving quickly and professionally. Their armor was different from the rebel soldiers. It was polished silver with glowing royal symbols across the chest plates. The new soldiers immediately opened fire. Precise blue energy shots struck the rebel troops before they could react. Within seconds, the rebel soldiers were disarmed and forced to the ground. The entire battle ended almost as quickly as it started. The hangar became quiet again, except for the distant sounds of space combat outside the station. One of the silver-armored soldiers walked toward Kale and dropped to one knee respectfully. "Prince Kale," the soldier said, lowering his helmet. His voice sounded relieved and respectful. "We have finally located you." Kale stepped forward carefully, recognizing the soldier. "Commander Reth," the prince said softly. "You made it." The commander gave a small nod. "We came as fast as we could," he replied. "The Empress ordered the entire royal fleet to search for you." Behind them, the captured rebel soldiers were being secured by the royal guards. Eli stood awkwardly near the wall, unsure what he should do now. He wiped some grease from his hands onto his old jacket. This situation felt very strange for a simple station mechanic. The commander slowly stood and looked toward Eli. His sharp eyes studied the human carefully. "And this human?" the commander asked. Kale quickly spoke before Eli could answer. "He protected me," the prince said. "He shared his food with me when I was starving. He helped me hide from the rebels." The commander looked surprised for a moment. His eyes moved from the prince back to Eli. "You protected the heir of the Empire?" he asked calmly. Eli scratched the back of his head awkwardly. "I didn't exactly know that part at first," he admitted. "I just saw a hungry kid." For a few seconds, the commander simply stared at him. Then something unexpected happened. The powerful alien commander suddenly placed one fist over his chest and bowed his head slightly toward Eli. It was a gesture of deep respect in the Empire. "You have done a great service today, human," the commander said seriously. Eli blinked in confusion. "I just shared my dinner," he replied. "That simple act may have saved the future of the Empire," the commander answered. Outside the window, another rebel ship exploded as the royal fleet continued winning the battle in orbit. The commander activated his communicator. "The prince has been secured," he reported. "Prepare the royal shuttle immediately." A moment later, a calm but powerful voice answered through the communicator. The voice was female, strong and commanding. "Bring him to me," the voice said. Even Elend could feel the authority in those words. Kale looked up with a small smile. "My mother," he said quietly. The commander nodded and then looked back at Eli once more. "The Empress also wishes to meet the human who protected her son," he said. Eli froze in place. "Wait," he said slowly. "You mean the actual Empress?" Kale smiled brightly this time. "Yes," the prince said. "And she is already on one of those ships." Eli looked again through the window at the enormous royal fleet surrounding the station. His quiet mechanic life had just become something far bigger than he ever imagined. And somehow it had all started with one simple decision: sharing his last meal with a hungry alien child. The cargo hangar slowly became quiet after the rebel soldiers were taken away. Royal guards moved carefully through the area, checking every corner to make sure the danger was gone. Outside the giant window, the battle in space was almost finished. The royal fleet had completely surrounded the remaining rebel ships. Some enemy vessels were already drifting in silence, their engines dark after surrendering. Others had fled far into deep space, trying to escape the powerful Imperial Armada. Eli Carter stood near a stack of cargo containers, still trying to understand how his normal day had turned into something so unbelievable. Just a few hours earlier, he had been fixing a broken cargo lift, thinking only about earning enough credits to buy dinner. Now he was standing beside the Prince of a galactic empire, surrounded by royal soldiers. Prince Kale looked much calmer now that the loyal fleet had arrived. The fear in his eyes had mostly disappeared, replaced by relief. Commander Reth walked toward them again, his silver armor reflecting the soft blue light of the hangar. "The royal shuttle has arrived," the commander said respectfully to the prince. "It will take us to the Empress immediately." Kale nodded. "Good," he replied. Then he looked toward Eli. "You are coming with us," the prince added with a small smile. Eli blinked in surprise. "Wait," he said quickly. "Are you serious?" Commander Reth gave a calm nod. "The Empress wishes to thank you personally," he explained. Eli rubbed his face with one hand. "I'm just a mechanic," he said. "I don't think I'm dressed properly to meet an empress." Kale laughed softly for the first time since Eli met him. "My mother will not care about your clothes," the prince said kindly. "She will care about your actions." A few minutes later, they walked across the hangar floor toward a sleek royal shuttle that had landed near the damaged cargo doors. The shuttle was beautiful and advanced, its silver surface glowing softly under the hangar lights. Eli had spent his life repairing old cargo machines and rusty transports. He had never even been close to something this expensive before. Royal guards stood in two lines beside the ramp. They stepped aside respectfully as the prince approached. Eli followed slowly behind, feeling very out of place among all the armored soldiers. Inside the shuttle, everything looked bright and clean. Soft white lights filled the cabin, and quiet engines hummed beneath the floor. As soon as they entered, the ramp closed behind them, and the shuttle lifted smoothly into the air. Through the side window, Eli watched the station grow smaller as they left the hangar. The huge royal fleet filled the darkness of space all around them. Massive warships floated in perfect formation, protecting the area like silent guardians. Within minutes, the shuttle approached the largest ship of them all. It was enormous, far larger than the other warships. Golden lights lined its hull, forming the symbol of the Imperial throne. "That is the Imperial crown," Kale explained, noticing Eli staring at it. "It is my mother's flagship." The shuttle docked smoothly inside a large bay of the giant ship. When the door opened, more royal guards were waiting. They guided the small group through wide, shining corridors made of polished metal and crystal lights. Everything inside the flagship looked powerful and elegant. Eli felt like he was walking through a royal palace instead of a warship. Finally, they reached a large, circular chamber with tall doors at the end. Two elite guards opened the doors slowly. Inside the chamber was a wide throne room. Soft golden light filled the space, reflecting from tall columns and smooth silver walls. At the far end of the room stood a tall alien woman wearing a long royal cloak. Her presence alone filled the entire chamber with quiet authority. Her skin was the same pale blue color as Kale's, but her eyes glowed with wisdom and strength. Eli did not need anyone to explain who she was. This was the Empress, the most powerful ruler in the entire empire. Prince Kale ran forward immediately. "Mother," he said happily. The Empress stepped forward and gently placed her hands on her son's shoulders. For a moment, the powerful ruler looked only like a relieved mother. "I am glad you are safe," she said softly. Then her eyes slowly turned toward Eli. The room became very quiet. Eli suddenly felt every royal guard watching him. He shifted his weight awkwardly, unsure what to say. The Empress walked slowly across the room until she stood in front of him. For a few seconds, she studied the human mechanic carefully. "You are the one who helped my son," she said calmly. Eli nodded slightly. "I just gave him my dinner," he replied honestly. The Empress smiled gently. "Yes," she said. And that simple act revealed something important. Eli looked confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. The Empress glanced briefly toward Commander Reth before speaking again. "My son's disappearance was not entirely an accident," she explained slowly. "We knew the rebel generals were planning something, so we allowed a small test to happen." Eli frowned in confusion. "A test?" he repeated. The Empress nodded calmly. "We wanted to see which people in the galaxy would help a helpless child, and which would ignore him." She looked directly at Eli again. "Many beings walked past my son on that station today," she said, "but only one stopped and shared his last meal." Eli stood silently, still trying to understand. The Empress raised her hand slightly. "And that act of kindness has now changed something far greater than you realize," she said. Eli blinked again. "What do you mean?" he asked slowly. The Empress gave a small, mysterious smile. "That means," she said quietly, "that humanity has just passed a very important test." The throne room of the Imperial Crown was silent after the Empress spoke those words. Eli Carter stood in the middle of the shining chamber, still trying to understand what he had just heard. Humanity passed a test. The sentence repeated again and again inside his mind. He was only a poor mechanic from a forgotten space station. How could his small decision affect an entire species? The Empress slowly walked toward the large window behind her throne. Outside the glass, the massive royal fleet floated peacefully in orbit around Outpost K-17. The battle with the rebels had already ended. Most of the enemy ships had surrendered or escaped far into deep space. The Empire was safe again. Prince Kale stood beside his mother, looking calm and proud. He glanced at Eli and gave him a grateful smile. The Empress turned back toward the room and spoke again. "For many years we have watched the younger civilizations of the galaxy," she said in a calm voice. "We observe how they treat the weak, the poor, and the helpless, because that reveals their true nature." Eli listened quietly while the royal guard stood perfectly still around the chamber. The Empress continued speaking. "Some species ignore suffering completely," she said. "Others help only when there is profit or power to gain. But sometimes, very rarely, we see true kindness." Her glowing eyes moved toward Eli again. "You believed my son was just a hungry child," she said gently. "You had no reward waiting for you. You had no reason to help him. Yet you shared the only food you had." Eli shrugged slightly, still feeling awkward in such an important place. "He looked hungry," Eli said simply. That seemed like a good enough reason. For a moment the Empress looked thoughtful, then she smiled again. "Yes," she said quietly. "Sometimes the simplest reasons are the most powerful." She turned slightly toward the officers standing nearby. "Prepare the galaxy broadcast," the Empress ordered. The officers immediately began activating communication panels along the walls. Large holographic screens slowly appeared in the air above the throne room. Eli watched in surprise as star systems, planets, and cities appeared across the displays. "Wait," Eli said nervously. "What kind of broadcast?" Prince Kale grinned slightly. "The whole Empire is about to hear a story," the young prince said, "and you are part of it." Within minutes, the communication officers finished preparing the transmission. A bright signal beam left the flagship and spread across hundreds of star systems. Billions of citizens across the Empire suddenly saw the same image appear on their screens: the throne room of the Imperial Crown. The Empress stepped forward into the center of the chamber. Her voice became strong and clear as she began speaking to the entire Empire. "Citizens of the Imperial Alliance," she announced, "today our Empire faced betrayal from those who sought power through fear. But today we were also reminded of something greater than power." The screen showed the image of Eli standing beside Prince Kale. Eli suddenly realized billions of people were now looking directly at him. He tried not to panic. The Empress continued speaking. "My son survived not because of armies or warships," she said. "He survived because of one simple act of kindness." She raised her hand toward Eli. This human shared his last meal with a hungry child he did not know. He asked for nothing in return. And because of that choice, the future of the Empire remains safe across the galaxy. Countless people now watch the human mechanic standing beside the royal family. The Empress spoke again, her voice filled with authority. "For this act of honor, the Empire will remember the human named Eli Carter." Eli swallowed nervously. Something told him this moment was about to become even more surprising. The Empress turned toward him and made a formal announcement. "From this day forward, humanity will be recognized as an official ally of the Imperial Alliance." The royal officers in the room placed their fists against their chests in respect. "And Eli Carter," the Empress continued, "you will no longer live as a forgotten mechanic on a distant station." She stepped closer to him and spoke the final words slowly and clearly. "I appoint you as royal guardian and advisor to Prince Kale." The entire room became silent again. Eli stared at her in complete shock. "Wait," he said quietly. "You want me to do what?" Prince Kale laughed happily and walked over to stand beside him. "It means you are staying with us." The prince explained. "You are my friend now." Eli looked around the throne room, at the royal guards, the shining walls, and the enormous fleet outside the window. Just one day earlier he had worried about how to afford dinner. Now he was standing inside the most powerful ship in the galaxy. The Empress placed a hand gently on her son's shoulder and looked at Eli one last time. "Sometimes the fate of empires changes because of great battles," she said softly, "but sometimes it changes because one person chooses to be kind." Eli slowly smiled, still amazed at how everything had happened, all because he had shared his last meal with a hungry alien child. And in doing so, he had unknowingly changed the future of the galaxy.